Helen Willits with that report. Now we're turning to Iran because there are more reports of several cities across the country where more clashes between anti-government protesters and the police are taking place, including in the capital itself, Tehran. Now police say that they've arrested more than 700 protesters at anti-government demonstrations and that officials say that 35 people have been killed. Well, my colleague Baran Abbasi from BBC Persian has been monitoring what is happening. So just bring us up to date in terms of these protests, what we're seeing on the streets. What's the latest that you have?
The protests have continued into a second week. There's heavy security presence on the streets, and there are heavy clashes between the protesters and security forces. And security forces seem to be using more heavy-handed tactics against the protesters. The death toll have gone up to 37 at least, and among them is a young woman whose death was confirmed a couple of hours ago. Her pictures of her taking part in this protest on the streets were circulating on social media yesterday, and today her family have confirmed that she was shot dead. Security forces have been using live rounds against protesters. There are many videos showing them directly aiming at protesters, as well as live rounds. They've been using pellet guns and water cannons and also tear gas against the protesters. Also, the government has organized its own counter-protest demonstrations. It's the second time in a matter of 3 days that these demonstrations are taking place. Usually when pro-government demonstrations are held, it marks the end of anti-government demonstrations in Iran. But this time, when the first were held on Friday, more anti-government protests were erupted in Iran, and now the government feels the need to use more marches around the country and show that it enjoys some popularity in Iran.
So 37 deaths now, and once again we're seeing a young woman killed. In terms of the Iranian officials' reaction, you spoke about these pro-government protests that have been organised, but what from the Iranian officials, what from the head of the Supreme Leader himself?
The Supreme Leader has spoken over the past few days, but he has not directly mentioned the demonstrations at all. He has just hinted that the unrest in Iran is led by what he calls enemies, which is usually in reference to Western countries. Iranian officials over the past few days, the armed forces commanders and also state officials have warned against more protests, saying that they are rioters, they are linked to Western countries, and that they will not tolerate unrest in the country, and there will be a crackdown. The British government, British ambassador to Tehran has also been summoned to the foreign ministry because the foreign ministry accuses Persian language media abroad of having a hostile character and being hostile towards the Iranian government.
So an escalation, and we're seeing the violence on the streets itself. Also concern, of course, that the Iranian army is now condemning the protesters. Baran Abbasi from BBC Persian, thank you very much for just keeping a